Hey guys, and welcome back to, I guess you could call it Season 3 of NTom and Volk's Spot of PC. Season 2 had a very erratic schedule, so we're trying to get back to basics in 2018. You're going to get 2 episodes a month. One will usually be picked by Volk, the other by me. For the first couple of months, we're going personal, let's say. The 2 this month, and you can probably tell by the developer of this game, were chosen by Volk. Oh yes, folks, this is Command and Conquer Red Alert 2.
Oh, the memories of this game. I could go on forever, but unfortunately I've been stuck to a half an hour window, so I will do my best to be as restrained as humanly possible. Yes, this is amazing. The sequel to the much acclaimed Command and Conquer Red Alert, and the changes to this as compared to its predecessor are many and amazing, and we'll get some more into that in just a moment. But for now, I just wanted to include this little cutscene to kind of help set the mood. Missiles flying everywhere as the Soviets invade America.
Westwood were just stroking their digitally enhanced peni here. It's like, oh, we have all the money, all the graphics, and you will enjoy this game.
It's actually quite amazing how, even though this game came several years later, like as far as Red Alert is concerned, that they still very much stuck to the whole live action cutscenes with the hammy actors and things like that. And that's the one thing I've always respected about the Command & Conquer series in general, is that even with the advances in technology and what have you, they've always kind of stuck to their roots.
Well, I mean, it's iconic, you know. You think of Command & Conquer, you think of, like, what was it, Kane and so on?
It was Kane in Command & Conquer as far as the Tiberian Wars and what have you is concerned. Here it's a little bit more spread out. There's no real, like, standout characters except for perhaps Tanya on the Allied side or what have you.
Noticing you're using doggos to clear up the fog of war here. Was that new for Red Alert 2?
Well, kind of. One thing that Red Alert 2 does that Red Alert 1 didn't is that you had to use kennels before to get attack dogs, whereas this time around they're unlocked from the get-go, and the Allied and Soviet factions actually have their own skins for the attack dogs. So for the Americans, you've got the trusty German Shepherd, I think it is, and then for the Soviet side, you've got the Siberian Husky.
Yeah, I like Huskies, they're so adorable. Right, so, what are we going to be showing off in this, the first glorious episode of the season?
Alright, so we got a bit of a skirmish match here to begin with. I've pitted myself as the Allied faction to have a bit of a free-for-all between the Soviets and what is new to the expansion of this particular game, which is Yuri's Revenge, the Yuri faction. And I could just see Flame kind of frothing at the mouth a little bit there.
I was thinking the same exact damn thing. The internet has ruined me.
Anyway, I think I should probably explain some of the backstory of Red Alert 2 before we get into this. So the vanilla version of Red Alert 2 started with the Soviet Union making their stake on an invasion on the US. And obviously, President, not the current president, is very miffed by this. He's like, we're supposed to be allies, you maniac. You know we'll retaliate. And he's just like, well, don't be so sure, Mr. President. And at this point, Yuri is actually part of the Soviet faction. And, of course, Allies try to launch a nuclear response against the Soviet, but Yuri uses his crazy mind control tactics in order to stop them from opening the doors to the missile silos, effectively blowing the entire facility up with its own payload.
Right.
And then that kind of sets the events in motions where the Allied are trying to basically boot the Soviets out of their home and take the fight back to them. Which obviously goes very well for them because we assume the Allies win that particular encounter. But unbeknownst to them, Yuri has kind of been pulling the strings in the background to overthrow the premier of the Soviet Union and assume world domination by his own terms. So the events of Yuri's Revenge happens where he constructs a device that mind controls entire countries of people. And during the spat between the Allies and the Soviets, Yuri has been constructing these devices basically all across the world. So essentially he's just turning the entire world into mind-controlled drones. And he succeeds, if not for the fact that the Allied had a time machine, which they used first of all to fail and then accidentally go back to the prehistoric era and have to fend off dinosaurs, and then eventually got it working again in order to go back before Yuri actually mind controlled everyone. And then events kind of go from there, eventually defeat Yuri, and that's basically the abridged version of the Red Alert 2 plot. There's a little bit more magickering going on, like Yuri talks briefly about how there was like a small psychic sect, as it were, that apparently Joseph Stalin was a part of. Wouldn't you believe it? Joseph Stalin was a psychic, apparently. And there's a little bit more apart from that, but that's more or less the gist of what you're fighting for in Red Alert 2. Now, as far as gameplay goes, you may notice some nice visual changes right away. In Red Alert 1, in particular, the buildings, there wasn't really much to differentiate between the Allies and the Soviets, where this time around all the buildings are unique, they're distinct, they give each faction their own identity that is clearly visible from a glance, as opposed to before where you had to kind of squint your eyes and say, wait, are they Allied or Soviet? Oh wait, that tank is a Soviet only thing, that means they must be the Soviets.
Yeah, and like everything pops more, like you can, and again, like you just said, you can see at a glance the iconography is clear, and everything just seems a lot more animated.
They definitely went above and beyond in terms of making things pop in this game. And this isn't exactly the first time they've used this either. They kind of debuted this style of isometric view and graphic style with Command and Conquer Tiberium's Sun. Another really, really great game, but doesn't quite hold a candle to Red Alert 2 in my opinion, but some people might be in disagreement with that. Some people are very much into their Tiberium Wars and their canes and what have you. So in this case, I'm also playing as the Allied faction, but each of the factions, in multiplayer at least, also has their own kind of sub-factions or countries. So in this case, Allies have access to Great Britain, Korea, and France, and they each get their own unique unit in order to use in battle. So in this case, we have the Grand Cannon, which you might see a few of dotted around here. And my strategy opening up to this was basically get to the middle as quickly as possible, build a bunch of Grand Canyons. I'm sorry.
You will never pass me now.
Well, it may as well be. I'm basically digging a trench here with just death and destruction all around. So I've just assumed control of the entire middle section, which allows me to kind of build up my forces and figure out what's what, and hopefully in the process show off a few units, like we have the Battle Fortress and of course the infamous Kirov airship, which always comes out. Yeah, it's like the slowest moving unit in the universe, but if it actually gets anywhere near your base, you're pretty much screwed.
Well, that's how you balance a game like this. You give it fuck off power, but then you make it as like slow as a snail, otherwise you just win every match.
That's not to say it's a glass cannon. These things have tons of health. You can see my Battle Fortress is kind of hammering away at it, and it's not really doing a huge amount compared to proper anti-air defense and what have you, but I'm going with what I have available, and at the same time building some anti-air defense to help out, because these things are creeping towards me, and I am not comfortable with it.
So what's all that scattered popcorn on the floor over there?
That is your ore. You may remember in Red Alert 1 you had your ore and your gemstones as your means of collecting currency. And this time it looks a little bit more high def, so it looks a bit like chicken nuggets or popcorn depending on how you perceive it.
I'd start a war over that, that's for sure.
Everyone remembers the great popcorn wars. Many alive were lost that day.
The Tiberium Tendies, I remember it well.
So another thing you may notice on the battlefield at the moment is that the Allied faction has upgraded their artillery ever so slightly, and I'm using something which is called a prism tank, which is essentially a long-range unit with a giant laser gun that uses like refraction and reflection to shoot highly concentrated beams of light and generally just make mincemeat out of anything it touches. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a glass cannon, so you don't typically want to send it out by itself, but you know what, I was feeling a bit cocky with my Battle Fortress as well, so I thought, you know what, just get stuck in.
Just for those of you who don't know what a glass cannon is, Volk, do you want to brief them?
It's essentially referring to a unit or another individual or weapon, I guess, that is high in power but very low on health and or defense. So the idea is it's incredibly strong, but a couple of well-placed hits will put it out of commission pretty much instantly.
Yeah, like it were made of glass. Say, Aqua from Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, for example.
Yeah, let's go with that. And another thing they actually added in Red Alert 2, as you may notice, the chevrons, I think they're called, that are appearing on units. As your units kill more things and survive in the heat of battle, they can actually get promotions, which come with multiple benefits, some being as simple as maybe being slightly faster or slightly more powerful, but when they reach maximum rank, which is heroic, the dynamics of their weapon can change ever so slightly. So in the case of the Prism tank, the beam will actually start spreading out and hitting other things, so it actually becomes more like an AoE weapon as opposed to just a concentrated fire in one area kind of dealio. And they also gain the ability to regenerate.
Sorry to use a pleb down like comparison, but that kind of reminds me of the weapons in Ratchet and Clank, where you get them to their max level and they may become like different in terms of elements. They may get more cannons, different functions and whatnot. Like I think the flame whip becomes like a bluish kind of thing. I always confuse that with like the lava gun, which I think becomes the liquid nitrogen gun.
I believe you may be right, although I'm not as brushed up on Ratchet and Clank as I would like to be. So the Soviets have been taken care of in this particular map, so now we're going to make our way to the Yuri faction, which is obviously the new faction in the Red Alert 2 expansion. And as you may expect from the man himself, a lot of his units are themed around being able to take control of things and turn your enemy's forces against them.
Oh, of course.
So they can have towers that can mind control. They've also got what is essentially a giant brain in a jar in tank tracks that they could just send towards the enemy and just start mind controlling things left, right, and center. But if it takes control of too many things at the same time, it starts overloaded and actually destroys itself.
Oh, I see. So you can just like send wave after wave of tanks or soldiers after it to basically, like you say, overload it.
Yeah, just send loads of fodder at it, and it'll be forced to kind of mind control whatever like the nearest unit is to it, and you just overload it that way. For collecting their ore as well, they actually use slaves instead of ore miners. It does come with the advantage that they can be a lot more mobile, but if you actually destroy the slave miner, you actually free the slave and can actually use them against the enemy if you wanted to.
Oh, that's great. It's like the Zap Brannigan way of doing things. I send wave after wave of my men after the kill dots until they hit their predetermined kill limit.
More or less, although to be honest, these slaves don't get very far armed with literally just a shovel and a movement speed similar to the Kirov airship. But you know, it's kind of a fun touch.
They get like way overconfident from being freed, and their first taste of freedom makes them think that yes, I can punch out a tank using my bare hands. Let's have a go.
It is actually really, really funny when you just send in a wave of slaves after the enemy. You know they're not going to do anything, but it just looks amazing.
Oh, I love how like games made light of the literal slave trade.
They have a lot of really, really crazy things. Actually, a unit you may have saw briefly as well was the Mirage tank, which can actually disguise itself as a tree. And you can, essentially on the opponent's side, if you keep it completely stationary, they'll just think it's a tree, and then they'll wonder about it, and suddenly just tanks appear out of nowhere and start firing at them.
Surprise, you thought I was a fur, but alas, I'm not.
So here we go. We are going to use the Chronosphere here to finish them off. It got a bit of an upgrade. Rather than only teleporting one unit, you can now teleport up to 9 if they're clustered together. So you know those Prism tanks from earlier?
Oh.
Yep, we're just going to send a whole bunch more.
Beautiful.
At the most vulnerable spot. It is amazing. It's like one of those tactics you can use if the game sort of drags on too long. You just build yourself a Chronosphere, a bunch of units, send them in the back lines, and just go ham.
Where are your brains in jars on tanks now, Yuri?
Actually, Yuri has a unique unit called Yuri Prime, which I'm assuming is the true Yuri as opposed to one of his clones. And he can actually take control of buildings, so as well as being able to like take control of base defenses and what have you, you can actually take control of their construction yard. And then you can either build stuff around that, or you can force repack it, send the MCV back to your base and basically steal all their tech.
Nice.
Absolutely insane. But this ain't going to be the only thing we're covering, because I actually have a bit of a treat for you all. And that is, there is a mod for this game, which I played years and years and years ago, back when I was kind of playing this game in my off time. and it's since received a bunch of updates, so I actually want to give some coverage to that as well as we try to clear up the rest of these forces here, which shouldn't take too long. Here we go, the Rocketeers and the Prism Tanks will help finish it off. Apparently those also count as buildings, never mind.
Oh, son of a bitch.
They're really making me work for this victory, like, goddamn. But this is pretty much the gist of what you'll expect from the vanilla Red Alert 2 experience. An experience which I believe holds out to this day. But if you want something a bit more updated, well, just wait for this.
Volk, you're such a cheeky fucker, you know?
Well, I had to think of a way to kind of bridge the gap. Alright, here we go, enough full stalling. This is Mental Omega, which is touted as an almost perfect Yuri's Revenge, and what we're actually playing as is a homemade fourth faction called the Foen Revolt, which is I believe they're meant to be a human faction, but I'm not entirely sure. They're a little bit shrouded in mystery at the moment. I don't think they've quite finished the backstory to them, but basically they specialize in very high-tech stuff and nanotechnology and all those cool things, and they have lots and lots of mechs.
Yeah, but be honest with me, are these guys from the future? Is that in the backstory?
No, I don't believe these guys are from the future. Although, in Mental Omega, there is a campaign, and there's a lot of time fuckery going on in that one in particular.
Time
like,
fuckery.
basically, the Allied factions took the Chronosphere, put it onto the back of what is basically a starship, called it the Paradox Engine, and just sort of went, yeah, this is our big machine, it has chronospheres, lasers, missiles, and God knows what else. And they're just gonna go, yep, this is us, what have you got? Nothing, that's what you got. So they did essentially use the Paradox Engine to fuck around with time whenever they see fit.
So I'm liking the change in terrain here, no more snow, it's almost like Desert Island, actually.
Yeah, maybe a desert oasis, you know, one of those tropical islands like in the Dominican Republic perhaps, or something like that, I don't know. Either way, there's palm trees, there's sand, there's a bit of greenery around, you can't go wrong.
There's the popcorn tendies on the ground there.
Oh yes. And Mental Omega actually does have some slight differences, whereas in the original game, any tech structure you capture you can build around, whereas with this one they kind of thought, that's probably a bit too strong, so they relegated it to being a single tech building with that ability, and you basically use that to build your expansions off of. Can I just say, I love the music that this faction has, like, my god. It sounds so heroic.
As they blow apart trees and whatnot with laser cannons.
Oh yeah, well that's how they do things. So one thing that the Foen faction does have in terms of infantry right away that you can notice, they have something called the Night Frame, which is, I wouldn't go as far as to call it like a mobile suit, like a Gundam, or like one of those specific Rim robot kind of things. More just like a power armor, like with the Space Marines and things like that. So the whole thing with Mental Omega is that this thing started... Oh, when did it start? I want to say like maybe 7 years ago, I think I caught my first wind of it.
God.
And that was basically when it was more like a rebalancing thing. They thought, okay, we'll take the current factions, we'll add a few new units, we'll rebalance some others, and maybe try and come up with our own campaign down the line. And over the course of the 7 years, I kind of forgot about it. I guess I kind of moved on from Red Alert 2 onto other things by that point.
Yeah.
But as I was getting this ready to do this pot of PC, I noticed that this mod was still going, and they added a fourth faction. There was like almost a full-blown campaign now, and basically every like faction has like their own new units now, as opposed to just having readjusted and rebalanced units. So what you actually saw there from the Allied faction was something called the 4 Gunship, which has its own personalized weather control device that it can use to make storm clouds and just rain lightning down on their foes. It's incredible, because previously the weather control device was a super weapon, but they kind of found a way to miniaturize it and kind of give it to this airborne monstrosity.
Right. I'm assuming all this, like, sprite work, if you can even call it that, is like custom and whatnot?
Oh yeah, this is all custom stuff. Like I say, the phone faction didn't exist in any way, shape, or form previously. So all the buildings, all the units, all the voiceovers, the music, they're all done completely from scratch and added into the game's framework, I guess is probably the right word to put it.
Construction complete.
And it's incredible that they actually managed to take what they were doing with Mental Omega previously and just take what they'd learned and make an entirely new faction that's not only believable, but just feels cool to play.
Oh yeah, like
being able to mess around with all these units and, you know, having the whole nanotech thing going on. They really did a stupendously good job of it.
they do seem a bit OP, but I guess that's the theme they were going for. It's like you said, they're like Space Marines, but on Earth. Earth Space Marines.
I wouldn't go as far as to say they're overpowered. Maybe I just have the right unit composition or something, or maybe it's just because I'm playing against the AI and anybody is overpowered in the face of the AI.
Even me, Volk? Even me?
Oh yes, you too can be as overpowered as me if you have a little bit of practice.
Hard cut to me on the game over screen multiple times.
Actually, I will say Mental Omega has also made the AI a lot stronger than it was in the classic game. The AI is not afraid to pile on aggression on you. Whereas before, in Red Alert 2 and Yuri's Revenge, I guess, they were quite at home with an AI that will kind of build up a little bit of a force and then just kind of send it at you, then build up another force and then send that at you. With this one here, they have more of a thing where they'll build up a few units and then kind of send them to kind of test your defenses just to see if you're not just kind of rushing to tech up and things like that.
Yeah.
So they really went above and beyond to actually make the AI at least appear a lot more smarter. Of course, being the AI, it's not going to be perfect. There's always going to be a way to exploit it. But it's going to at least give you a decent challenge as compared to the original game. So here we go.
Just as we're like coming to the end of this episode, mate, how did Red Alert 2 do in terms of reception and sales?
In terms of sales and reception, that is a good question, actually. I wouldn't have the exact figures on hand, but I shall see if I can look them up now for you.
Okay.
As we lay mincemeat to the base.
I was going to say, I'm just enjoying the destruction over here.
There's a lot of units I didn't quite know what the hell they did, so there may be some units that are like hanging around not really doing very much. I was just kind of thinking, these guys look cool, let's see what they're like. Oh, they built the weapon control device at the worst possible time. Just like, yeah, let's just plonk our super weapon right here while the enemy is just barreling death upon us. That sounds like an amazing idea. Alright, here we go. I've got the thing here. Reception. In the United States, Red Alert 2 sold over 800,000 copies and earned 26.9 million by August 2006 after its initial release in October 2000. It was the 11th best-selling computer game between January 2000 and August 2006. Wow. That is a long time to hold that kind of a position. What the hell was PC gaming doing around this time?
Especially for like a genre that requires so much player input and thought, like RTS, you know, I won't exactly call it a niche genre, but I wouldn't say it's like everybody's cup of tea. Like, I like it just because I'm one of those weirdos who likes things that are beyond my grasp, so to speak. Adventure games too, but RTS is a lot more cerebral, as it were, so it's great that it did so well.
Oh yeah, as far as ratings go as well, it averaged like 8.5s and 9s across the board. So it did very, very well, and the expansion just added more to it. And of course, that was received probably equally as well. In fact, it kind of helped prolong the game. It gave people more things to mess around with. The third faction definitely helped, I think, in terms of its replayability. And of course, having online functionality always helps in terms of keeping a game alive. Especially one that is as high in quality as Red Alert 2 in general.
So how is the Command & Conquer series doing nowadays? What was the most recent game?
Command & Conquer 4, and we don't talk about that game.
Well, that just speaks well for the franchise.
It was kind of terrible. Command & Conquer 3, Kane's and the Kane's Wrath expansion, it did okay, although I don't know, it just didn't seem to capture like what the original Command & Conquer games and what have you kind of helped to set up. But you know, it was okay. It's a good romp if you can find it pretty cheap. And of course, Red Alert 3 is kind of more of the same. Probably doesn't hold quite the same iconic appeal, but, you know, it does have a lot more star power, like with Tim Curry as your Soviet leader, and J.K. Simmons playing as the president of the USA.
I've seen those things, yeah.
It was very amusing. I laughed my ass off when J.K. Simmons just appeared. Just like, you ready to send those commies running back to their mommies? It's just like, J.K. Simmons, please.
More like J.K. lol, am I right?
Indeed. Although it was pretty good. It had a really decent expansion in Uprising as well, which kind of added challenge maps and what have you. So that's another game I could recommend if you're perhaps looking for something a bit more recent. But in terms of the Command & Conquer series, there's very few that I wouldn't recommend apart from Command & Conquer 4. But you can actually pick up the entire catalogue of Command & Conquer games on Origin's website, I believe. They actually have every single one. Some of them you may need to fiddle around a bit to get them to work on, like, Windows 10. Like with this, I couldn't get it to work on Windows 10 at all until I found CNCnet. And I just downloaded that, and although I couldn't get access to the campaign stuff, it does let me play skirmishes and what have you just fine. It has an online multiplayer function that was kind of placed in there to replace the now defunct one after, you know, Westwood went under.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to play this game again, it's still viable today, and there are ways and means out there in order to get it to work on any Windows system, and of course with all these high resolutions and what have you, just in case that's the sort of thing you're into. So yeah, I think that'll just about do it.
Good stuff, good stuff. Don't say we don't spoil you here at Spot PC. We give you Red Alert 2, we give you an expansion, we even talk about 3 and 4, but that's it now. Come back later today for another episode of NTom and Volk's Spot PC. See you then.